Lecture 5, Organizing Content Through Hierarchy, Spacing, and Alignment. So this lecture is going to be about just why organizing matters in visual communication. So we're going to talk about hierarchy, spacing, and alignment and how they shape understanding. And the goal is just to learn a little bit more about practical tools that can be used to help you meet these goals. So looking at our module learning objectives, today we're going to be looking at organizing content using hierarchy, spacing, and alignment, and then we'll start troubleshooting some common formatting issues that can occur. So to begin, visual hierarchy. So hierarchy, as we know, is directing attention through different size, weight, placement. And so there are tools for hierarchy across the different platforms. So with your font size scaling, using bold or regular font, using color, accents for emphasis. And so you can see some kind of demonstrations of it here. We have the title is the biggest, and we have our body text. And then at the bottom, kind of key point, key takeaway. And so it's centered, so a different alignment, and then it's bolded. So it stands out a little bit more from the other text, but still it's clear that it's underneath that hierarchy of the title. So overusing images or icons or elements can overwhelm and distract from this actual visual hierarchy that you're trying to demonstrate. And so within that as well, we have visual consistency. And so that's using the same core elements across all of the different things that you're creating to have that really unified and recognizable professional look. And when you have that, it builds the trust and the recognition and that connection with your audience. And so I have a screenshot here of the WVU visual identity. So I'll link to that on eCampus so you can kind of explore it a little bit more. But we have a very clear logo, and the typography, the color, all of these things are consistent across any instance of use for WVU. So it's around the university, it's with the sports teams, it's with all of the different medical centers that we have across the state, across the country, across the world. When you see somebody with that, you automatically know that they are representing WVU. And so that kind of brand image really helps communicate things so much easier than it would be if things were different across different colleges, or if there was one for the university and one for the medical center and maybe a different one for teams. It would just get crazy. So we have this really, really strong consistency through our visual. And I do recommend that you follow that link and explore this a little bit more so you can see, and you'll start to notice some of this more and more around campus when you see that they are really intentional choices that are just consistent across. And so images are great to use in any sort of visual that you're creating when they're used intentionally and correctly. And so they can help you support the key messages that you're trying to convey. They can get people channeling things emotionally, right? They can also serve to boost memory if you have a really notable visual there, or maybe you have a funny image to help some complex theory land. That's great. But you want to make sure that they're always going to be high quality and they're relevant and they don't distract from the actual message that you're trying to convey. And they are not just to be pretty, right? You can maybe have a little bit of a visual that's not going to distract too much from the actual content. But when you have a featured image, you want to make sure that it is just supporting everything else that's there. Some people will use visuals completely to replace text, and that doesn't generally work. You want them to balance out with each other. And so this is a screenshot of one of the templates available on Canva. So this is clearly trying to demonstrate a particular era, right? This is essentially my youth on the screen right now. But there's a lot there. It's distracting. And, you probably wouldn't use all of these pieces if you're starting from this Canva template. There's a lot of different things in there that maybe are intended to be deleted. But look at that text. That's, violating so many of the principles that we've started to discuss already. But then you have the image of the Game Boy in the background with the clouds, and there's like little splotches as well. Brings back great memories of Nickelodeon, but it's very distracting. So honestly, I have not read that text until I was looking at this for maybe the fourth or fifth time. The title I couldn't even really see because I was looking at so much of what's behind. So these images here, they definitely convey a time period, but beyond that, they're distracting completely. So this is, a little bit of an extreme example of incorrect use of images, but it still gets the point across. So you need to be a very careful and intentional editor when you're working, particularly if you choose to work with a template that somebody else has created. So this isn't to say that you can't use all of those icons. Some of them are great, and they will often really, really help to facilitate you getting that message across. But it needs to be able to reinforce what you're already having, right? It's not replacing anything completely. You want to make sure that you're avoiding these common mistakes, right? So make sure you don't end up accidentally deleting anything or changing the color that makes something disappear, or go the reverse and make it kind of stand out and not fit the theme overall. Overusing icons can be really difficult, and this is a trap that I see people fall into very often. Because the option is there, people feel like they have to use it, where you can be picky, right? Designing visuals is a great opportunity to get out all of your pickiness. Be really intentional. Use the icon sparing, make sure they're supporting it, and then make sure that you're also thinking about the accessibility. So this example, there's essentially nothing there that is accessible. I can't imagine how you would identify all of this to make it actually make sense if a screen reader was trying to interpret it. Maybe one of these pieces could work, like the computer, like the browser aspect, maybe you could communicate that it's meant to be a window on a computer. Beyond that, a lot of it would just be really, really, really difficult to make it make sense. So accessibility would rule out a lot of things very quickly if you're actually considering it appropriately. So with pictures, you also want to make sure that you are formatting them properly when you include them. So if you put a picture into PowerPoint, you can right click and go to Format Picture, and then you'll have all of these options for sizing. So one of the things that will happen a lot when people are using images is they will end up getting distorted. And so usually that's in how they're being moved around the document or the slideshow. They might accidentally pull one corner so it gets distorted a little bit. You can go through and format this properly so it would lock the aspect ratio, making sure that it would always stay square, right? It'll keep the same proportions no matter how big or small you make it. But you also want to make sure, with this, that you're actually uploading the image instead of copying and pasting it from a browser, because that will essentially most of the time result in it losing some of its quality. So it will be a less clear image if you copy and paste versus uploading it. You can do the same thing with Google Slides. It looks very similar. So you go to Format Options, and there will be a column that will pop up on the right side with several different options. And so the first one will be the sizing. And so you can do the same thing there to lock the aspect ratio. In Canva, we haven't really talked about that much yet, but we will. So I wanted to add this now as well. If you have an image in Canva and select it, this little toolbar will appear above it. So you click on position, and then you can see down toward the bottom of this the sizing. And so you can do the same thing for locking the aspect ratio. It just has the little visual of the lock instead of the words. So if we're going to use these images, we need to make sure that they have the alt text. And so alt text is alternative text. It's a brief descriptive summary that describes the content or the function of the image. And so this is a way to make sure that you actually are using images that you need, right? When you go to the alt text, if you put it in and what you come up with actually, you're like, this doesn't really mean much, that tells you that maybe you don't need the image there. But so when we're thinking about accessibility, this ensures that it's perceivable. So it has the visual information being conveyed to those who can't see it. It's very important, right? We have the context. It helps people understand the purpose and how it relates to the surrounding content. This is something that's useful for everybody, right? A lot of times people might not make that connection themselves. And so the alt text will help to make sure that it is clear. And for the user experience, it avoids confusion. Makes people realize that something isn't actually just decorative. Or if it is, you can tick a little box that will mean the screen reader skips it. So you have to then think, do I need this image here if it's not important enough for the screen reader to actually engage with? Sometimes that would be appropriate, sometimes it's not. So best practices for alt text, you want to make sure that you are being very concise. It should be a sentence, maybe two. You want to make sure that you're being very descriptive with it and you're focusing on what's actually important, not every little detail, but you want to have some level of detail so it's clear that somebody would understand why it's there. And so you don't want to repeat anything. So sometimes your image will have words on it itself. You don't need to include those, or not on the image, but if the text around it is talking about it, you don't need to be repetitive. You don't need to tell it that it's an image, right? When the screen reader is reading it, it will already identify it as an image before. So saying it's an image of would just be redundant. And you do want to use punctuation to ensure that it is read properly. So punctuation is how we can convey these different speech patterns, right? So you need the period to make it clear that that is the end. And so alt text in PowerPoint, you would right click on your image or the shape or the chart that you want to describe, and then click view alt text. And this little pane that you can see a screenshot of up here will pop up. You would type your alt text into the box below. There are options now most of the time to have AI generate the alt text for you. You can try it and see, edit it with a heavy hand if you do decide to use that. And here's where you can also mark if it's decorative. So if the screen reader doesn't pay attention to it, you can just toggle that option at the bottom. In Canva, it's similar. So there's the three dots. You can click on that and you'll see the alternative text pop up. They also have an AI option there. Canva AI is developing is probably a nice way to put it. So I don't know that I would trust what it has to say, but you can use it as a starting point and then kind of work backward from that. And you want to make sure that you save it once it's complete. And so our takeaways here are that images and icons are intentional. So they should be reinforcing the meaning that you're making. They're not going to replace anything. They're not a substitute. You want to make sure when you do have them that you're using the tools, the best tools of the program to resize them. So don't just drag, actually go into the format picture and change your sizes that way. And then ensure that you're always labeling everything with the appropriate alt text to make sure that you are abiding by our accessibility guidelines. And then I'm probably going to say this a billion times through the lectures for this, but designs and templates are not always the best. So you can use them as a starting point, but we've seen already some examples of not so great ones. So, be critical of what exists out there and work with them, use the master options to edit them to make them actually fit your needs and to ensure that they are abiding by our accessibility expectations.